I set the folder down on the kitchen table and stepped back. My hands were shaking. Not from the cold, even though it was February and the heat had been acting up again. My hands were shaking because of what was inside that folder, a single sheet of paper, a number printed in black ink at the bottom of a statement from a wealth management firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Total assets under management, $6,100,000. I sat down on the closest chair, the one with the wobbly leg my husband had been meaning to fix for 2 years. He was good at fixing things for other people, apparently not so much for us. My husband, Raymond Earl Hutchins, the man I had spent the last 4 years supporting on a teacher's pension and whatever I could pick up substitute teaching on the side. The man who told me, again and again, that the woodworking business was almost there. Almost. Just a little longer. Just a little more patience. Just trust me, Margaret. I had trusted him. I sat in that cold kitchen, holding that folder, and I thought about every sacrifice I had made for a man who had $6 million sitting in an account I didn't know existed. But I need to go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. And because if I just tell you the ending, you won't understand why I did what I did, why I stayed, why I paid. Why, for 4 years, I told everyone who asked that it was fine. It was not fine. I was 61 years old when I met Raymond. I want you to understand what that means for a woman in this country. 61. My daughter had been after me for 2 years to try online dating. My sister thought I should just be grateful I had my health and my garden and my little house in Asheville. My friends from the school where I'd taught for 30 years were mostly either still married, widowed and content, or divorced and done with the whole enterprise. I was widowed. My first husband, Gerald, had passed 7 years before from a heart attack that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning in March. We had been married for 29 years. Good years, mostly. Quiet years. Gerald was an accountant. Steady. Predictable. Safe. I had loved him deeply, and losing him had hollowed me out in ways I was still discovering even years later. I was not looking for anyone when I met Raymond. I was at a craft fair in Weaverville, walking past booths of handmade jewelry and pottery and soaps, when I stopped at a display of wooden furniture. A rocking chair, painted tables, jewelry boxes with inlaid designs. The workmanship was extraordinary. I had never seen anything like it outside of a museum. Raymond was standing behind the table in a flannel shirt with sawdust on his forearms, talking to another customer. He was 63. Gray at the temples, big hands, a face that looked like it had spent a lot of time outdoors and hadn't minded. I picked up a small jewelry box, a maple one with a hummingbird carved into the lid, and I said without thinking, "This is the most beautiful thing I've seen in years." He looked over at me and smiled. "That one took me 11 hours, he said. We talked for 45 minutes. The fair closed around us. He asked if I wanted to get coffee. We got coffee. Then dinner. Then dinner again the following Friday. Within 3 months, I knew I was in love with him, and I was terrified of it in the way you can only be terrified of something the second time around when you already know exactly how much it can hurt. Raymond was different from Gerald in almost every way. Where Gerald had been precise and careful, Raymond was instinctive and expressive. Where Gerald had talked about interest rates and retirement accounts, Raymond talked about grain patterns in walnut wood and the way the light changed in the mountains in October. He was warm and funny, and he really listened in a way that made me feel, at 61 years old, like I was worth listening to. He had been divorced for 12 years. No children. He had spent those 12 years building his craft, he said, traveling to shows, living simply. He rented a small workshop outside of town. He drove a 15-year-old truck that he kept running himself. He was, by every visible measure, a man who was getting by. I knew this going in. I want to be clear about that. I was not deceived about Raymond's financial situation at the start. He told me he was not a wealthy man. He told me the furniture business was his passion but not yet his livelihood. He was honest about it, or I believed he was, and I respected him for it. We dated for 1.5 years before he asked me to marry him. I said yes. My daughter cried, but she was happy for me. My sister asked careful questions about finances. I waved them off. I was in love. That was enough. The first year of marriage was lovely. We lived in my house, the little craftsman bungalow Gerald and I had bought in 1987 and that I had kept after he passed. Raymond kept his workshop. I was still working, drawing my pension from 30 years of teaching 4th grade and picking up substitute days when I wanted them. We were comfortable. Not extravagant, but comfortable. Then the work slowed down. Raymond had always sold his pieces at shows, through word of mouth, occasionally through a small gallery in Asheville that took a 40% commission. It had never been a fortune, but it had been something. In the 2nd year of our marriage, the gallery closed. 2 of the shows he had counted on were canceled. He spent months on a commissioned dining table for a couple in Black Mountain who ended up backing out. He still worked. Every day, out in that workshop. I could hear the sander from the house on quiet mornings. He was not lazy. I want to be very clear about that, too. Raymond Hutchins was not a lazy man. But the money stopped coming in. I covered the mortgage. I covered the groceries, the utilities, the car insurance. I paid for the materials he needed for the workshop, because without materials there was no work, and without work there was no hope of things improving. I told myself it was an investment. I told myself every business had hard stretches. I had been a teacher for 30 years. I understood patience, and I understood that good things took time. My daughter started asking questions in year 2. "Mom, is he contributing anything?" she asked one afternoon when she had come over for lunch, and Raymond was out at the workshop. "He contributes in 100 ways," I said. "I mean financially. We're fine. Are you? Because you mentioned the furnace needed replacing, and I know your pension isn't." "We're fine," I said again, and I changed the subject. My sister was more direct. She sat across from me at her kitchen table in year 3 and said, "Margaret, you are 64 years old. You should not be spending your retirement supporting a grown man's hobby." "It's not a hobby," I said. "He's an artist. He's an artist who hasn't sold a piece in 8 months." I didn't have an answer for that. I stirred my coffee and looked out her window at the yard. "I love him," I said finally. "I know you do," she said. "I just worry about what happens to you if this doesn't turn around." I had the same worry. I won't pretend I didn't. There were nights I lay awake doing arithmetic in my head, calculating how many years my pension could sustain us at this rate, whether I should go back to full-time substitute work, whether we could sell the house and find something smaller. There were mornings I looked at my bank balance and felt a cold fear move through me that I never mentioned to Raymond. I never mentioned it because every time I got close to having the real conversation, I saw his face when he was working. The complete absorption, the steadiness in his hands, the pride when something came out right. I had spent 30 years watching children discover what they were good at, and I knew what it looked like when someone was doing exactly what they were meant to do. I could not take that from him. So I paid. Month after month, year after year. I paid, and I told myself it was fine, and I listened to my sister's concerns and my daughter's careful questions, and I said, every time, that we were managing. In year 4, Raymond had a health scare. A routine checkup turned into more tests, which turned into a week of genuine fear before the results came back clear. It was nothing a shadow on an image that resolved into nothing, but it shook us both. We were not young people. We did not have unlimited time, and we both knew it. After that, something shifted between us. We were softer with each other, more deliberate. He started leaving coffee on my side of the bed in the mornings, something he'd done early in our marriage and had gradually stopped. Now, I started sitting with him in the workshop some evenings, just reading in the corner while he worked, because we had both been reminded that the evenings were worth using. It was during one of those evenings, in early December of last year, that I noticed the folder. It was on the shelf above his workbench, between 2 woodworking manuals, the kind of shelf where things accumulated: pencils, sandpaper samples, receipts for lumber. I had never paid close attention to that shelf. It was his space. I respected his space the way I had always respected the line between what was mine and what was shared. But the folder had slipped sideways, and a piece of paper had fanned out from it, and I could see the letterhead from across the room. A wealth management firm. I told myself it was probably something old. Something from before we married. An account that had long since been emptied. Paperwork he'd never gotten around to throwing out. I went over and picked it up. I read it, and then I sat down on the stool by his workbench. in the cold of that December workshop, with sawdust in the air, and the sound of his sander gone quiet because he had stepped outside for a moment, and I read it again. The account had been opened 18 years ago. The assets had been professionally managed the entire time. The statement was dated 3 months prior. Total assets, $6,100,000. Raymond walked back in from outside and stopped when he saw my face. I held up the folder without saying anything. He went very still in the doorway. We looked at each other across the workshop, across 4 years of my pension checks and grocery receipts, and the furnace I had financed, and the materials I had bought so he could keep working, and I waited for him to explain to me what I was holding. He pulled up a second stool and sat down across from me. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I started to feel something hot building behind my eyes that I refused to let turn into tears. Not yet. Not until I understood. My father, he said finally. I waited. He was a difficult man, Raymond said. You know, I don't talk about him much. I did know that. In 4 years of marriage, I had heard very little about Raymond's father beyond the fact that he had died when Raymond was in his 40s and that their relationship had been strained. He made money in timber, Raymond said. A lot of it. When he died, he left it to me. All of it. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it, if I'm honest. Everything he had came from a way of doing business I didn't respect. Cutting corners. People who worked for him who he treated badly. Land that got stripped in ways that still haven't recovered. He looked down at his hands. I didn't touch it, he said. For 18 years. I let it sit in that account, and I went on working with my hands and making things and living like I'd always lived, because that money felt like something I hadn't earned and didn't deserve. I set up the management account so I didn't have to think about it. I never looked at the statements. I just let it be. I heard what he was saying. I understood the shape of it. But I also had 4 years of sleepless arithmetic pressing against the back of my ribs, and understanding something and being at peace with it are two very different things. Raymond, I said, I have been paying our mortgage for 4 years. I know. I paid for the lumber you used for the Morrison Commission. I paid the heating bill for this workshop for 3 winters. I went back to substitute teaching at 63 years old because I was worried about money. I know. His voice was quiet, not defensive. Something else, something heavier. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet again, and this time I let the silence sit because I could see he was finding his way through something. I was ashamed, he said finally. Not of the money, of myself. I didn't know how to tell you I had $6 million sitting in an account I refused to use because I was still fighting a battle with a dead man. It sounds insane when you say it out loud. It felt insane when I tried to say it. He paused. And I think I was also afraid. Of what? That it would change things. Between us. He looked up at me then, and his face was the face of a man genuinely uncertain, which was not an expression I had often seen on Raymond Hutchins. You married me when I had nothing. You stayed when things got hard. I knew that. I held on to that. If I'd told you about the money, I would never have been sure not really whether you were staying for me or staying because life got easier. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about Gerald, steady and predictable and safe. I thought about choosing Raymond not despite what he didn't have, but because of who he was when he didn't have it. I thought about my sister's worried face and my daughter's careful questions and all the mornings I had looked at my bank balance and felt afraid and said nothing because I loved him. And I thought about how foolish we had both been, him with his silent penance, me with my silent fear. 2 people in their 60s old enough to know better, old enough to know that time is not something you get back spending 4 years carrying burdens we could have put down. You could have trusted me, I said. Yes, he said. I should have. I wouldn't have loved you less because of your father's money. I know that now. You should have known it then. Yes, he said again. I should have. I stood up from the stool and walked to the workshop door and stood there for a while, looking out at the dark yard and the lights from the house, the little craftsman bungalow where I had lived most of my adult life. The cold was clean and sharp the way December air in the mountains gets, and I breathed it in and let it settle me. I heard Raymond stand behind me. I'm going to give it away, he said. I turned around. Most of it, he said. There are land restoration organizations, reforestation projects, the kind of work that undoes what he did. I've been researching it for 2 years. There are communities where his company operated that still haven't recovered. I want to use his money to fix what he broke." He paused. "I should have been doing it already. I was waiting until I figured out exactly the right way. I've been waiting so long I lost track of the fact that waiting was its own decision." I looked at him, this man with sawdust on his arms and a dead man's money he had never touched, and 6 years of marriage ahead of us. If we were lucky, maybe more, maybe less, no way to know. I thought about the rocking chair at the craft fair, the 11 hours it took to make it. A man standing behind a table in a flannel shirt who turned out to be exactly who he appeared to be, and also, at the same time, something I hadn't expected at all. "We're going to talk about this more," I said. "A lot more. We're going to talk about the 4 years of mortgage payments and the substitute teaching and the heating bills." "I know. And we're going to talk about what you should have said to me and when." "I know that too." "And then," I said, "we're going to figure out together what to do with the rest of it. Not you alone. Together. That's what married means." He nodded. His eyes were wet, and Raymond was not a man who cried easily, and seeing it broke something open in my chest that I hadn't realized was still sealed shut. "I'm sorry, Margaret," he said. "I know you are," I said. We stood in the doorway of that cold workshop for a long time without saying anything else. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky, and somewhere down the road a neighbor's dog was barking at something, and the whole world felt very quiet and very real and very much like something worth holding on to. We did talk, many times, over many evenings. I told him about the nights I'd lain awake doing arithmetic. He listened. He did not try to minimize it or explain it away. He just listened, the way he had always listened, which had been the first thing I loved about him. He told me more about his father, the man who had built a fortune by taking what the land offered and giving nothing back, who had expected his son to follow him into it and never forgiven him for choosing wood and craft and quietness instead. Raymond had spent his whole adult life defining himself against that man. The money had been the last way he could do it. Refuse it completely. Live as though it didn't exist. Prove to himself that he didn't need it and didn't want it. What he hadn't accounted for was me. Hadn't accounted for what his silence would cost someone else. By spring, he had been in contact with 3 land restoration organizations. The conversations were complicated. The kind of reparative work he had in mind took years, not months, but they were started. He had also, quietly and without any fanfare, transferred money into our joint account for the first time. Not a fortune. Enough to replace the furnace properly and fix the wobbly chair leg and pay off the line of credit I had opened in year 3 and never mentioned to him. I told my daughter, not everything, not all at once, but enough. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "So he wasn't hiding money from you because he was taking advantage?" "No," I said. "He was hiding it because he was fighting a ghost." Something like that. She thought about it. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she said, "and also kind of beautiful, in a completely ridiculous way." "That," I said, "is Raymond exactly." My sister took longer to come around, which I had expected. She had spent 4 years watching me stretch a pension to cover 2 people, and her protectiveness of me was not something that dissolved quickly, but she came around. She had dinner with us in April, and she watched the way Raymond talked to me and listened to me and the way we moved around each other in the kitchen, like people who had learned each other's rhythms, and afterward she hugged me at the door and said, "He loves you." That part I never doubted. "Neither did I said. "The jewelry box is still on my dresser, the maple one with the hummingbird on the lid. Raymond made it the summer we met, 100 years ago. Before I knew his name or his history or the complicated inheritance sitting in an account in Charlotte. He gave it to me on our first anniversary, and I have kept every small piece of jewelry I own inside it. Last week he finished a new piece in the workshop, a writing desk, white oak, with joinery so precise it fits together without a single nail. He had been working on it for 4 months. He told me he had already been offered $8,000 for it and had turned it down. "Why?" I asked. "Because I want you to have it," he said. "I am 65 years old. I have lived long enough to know that love, real love, is almost never simple and is almost never what it first appears. I have lived long enough to know that people carry things they do not know how to put down, and that the bravest thing you can do is ask someone to help you carry it instead. I have also lived long enough to know that 4 years of mortgage payments deserves a really good writing desk. I told him that. He laughed the way Raymond laughs, which starts somewhere low in his chest and works its way up, and the sound of it filled the house the way good sounds should. We are still figuring things out. We are still having the long conversations, the ones about what we owe each other and what we should have said sooner. My sister still checks in more than she needs to. My daughter calls every Sunday without fail. But we are figuring it out together. That was the agreement. That is what married means. And the wobbly chair leg is finally fixed.